Welcome to the Nonprofit Report, your update on nonprofit organizations, issues, and leaders, viewable on YouTube and Oppenheim TV. I'm your host, Mark Oppenheim. Today, we're chatting with our special guest from the Florida Theater Performing Arts Center in Jacksonville, Florida. And we're having on the show Numa Saisselin, who is the president, Don Cameron, the chairperson, who is also a retired financial services assurance partner at PwC, my old firm, and Kevin Stone, vice president for programming. So I'd like to thank you all for joining us. I'm so excited to hear about Florida Theater, about the work that you're doing. It's wonderful to have you all.
We're happy to be here.
So, Numa, we're going to go over to you. We're going to jump right in and talk about the arts. Your theater is on the National Register of Historic Places. It was built in 1927 or opened in 1927. You've had almost 100 years of service to the community, but that community, that service has really changed around you. 1927 and 2025 is a century apart, or almost a century apart. Talk a little bit about how this theater came about and how it opened, its audiences, its performances, and today, juxtaposing the two.
Florida Theater is a almost 2,000 seat historic theater built in 1927. Privately owned and primarily a movie house until 1980. We opened, or the building itself opened, in April of 1927, which was significant because that was right on the cusp of talking pictures. So we opened in the silent film era, but they knew that talkies were coming. So that was significant architecturally for a couple reasons. One, they put sound technology in the booth when they built the building because they knew talkies were coming. But they hedged their bets and built the building with a full stage. If we'd been built 2 or 3 years later, it would have had a 15-foot deep stage because all they would have needed was a screen and speakers. But in the silent film era, there were live shows with the movies. So we have a 42 by 36-foot stage that we use for live performances primarily now. And we're lucky that the building was built when it was because we have a stage that we still use. And I've thought often about the foresight that the architects had, that they built a building that almost 100 years later we use for art forms that weren't even invented then. Electrified music, modern dance, jazz, rock and roll, etc. The building was acquired by our local arts organization in 1980, and with some private funding and some city funding, they restored it and reopened it as a performing arts center. The goal was to generate bodies downtown for downtown economic improvement. And here we are almost 40 years later, still operating that way. We're one of the most attended theaters in the country, according to Pollstar and Venues Now magazines. And we're coming up on our 100th birthday.
What I find to be so fascinating here is that story you tell of resilience and building it into the architecture itself. This whole idea that if you do things too narrowly, you end up building into your whole environment a lack of resilience, so that as circumstances change, you can't respond to them. You're not set up for it. It's also true for if you just, for example, in logistics change, just create a just-in-time supply chain, and all of a sudden you have COVID, and nobody has any raw materials to develop their products. Don, when you think about this organization, its impact on Jacksonville, and you have your greater metropolitan area has a million people, and then if you go even further into South Georgia and so on, you're talking about a huge audience. Talk about the significance, the hard-nosed significance to the economic vitality of Jacksonville, of Florida theater.
Oh, I think it's very important. If you look at the theater, I think we have, Kevin, help me, 160 shows, is that, or a year?
209 events last year.
209 events, and some of those are smaller. And so you're talking about 2/3 of the nights we have people coming downtown to an area that people weren't coming to, say 10 years ago. And the diversity of our shows, you can see country one night and then rock the next night and anything in between coming. And the number of people coming here, if you have 1,000 people coming, you might have 900 different people coming over the course of a week to 10 days. And I think it's very good for downtown Jacksonville because it's helped to revitalize that area. There's a restaurant called the Calford Chop House that opened up, has done successfully. And I think we have a lot to do with that because we have people coming downtown 2/3 of the nights that help to fill their restaurant. Now, I've been coming here since I was 6 or 7 years old. They used to have a Tuesday, like a kids' day where they would show a movie and we'd play games. And so I've got over 60 years of experience with the theater. And my wife and I still go probably 15, 20 shows a year. And it just doesn't get old.
I love the description that you had. You talked about the audiences being so different, right, from each other, different income levels, different ages, different races, sensitivities, interests, and so on. And isn't that, Kevin, part of the secret to your success? There are so many people who would view a 2,000-seat theater as a curse because it's so large, right? You have to, you're almost obligated to fill it. But now you can serve all these different individuals in a way, and it's also part of the dynamic of a city. You bring people together, they can have sort of side conversations. I dare say that in 27, you were serving mostly white audiences. It was mostly film. You could probably fill the theater initially, but during the vagaries of a century's tastes changing, this theater has basically been able to adopt and change with the times and welcome in new audiences as our civil society was strengthened through recognition of difference. Talk a little bit about how you program to keep all these different people engaged.
Well, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. Since I got here 11 years ago, and I'm sure right before I got here with Numa, there's been a concerted effort to program for the entire community. Now, the community isn't just white or just Black or just Asian or just Latino. It's everything. So
we're not one thing, right?
Correct.
We're different ages, we're different sensibilities, right? We're not defined by the fact that I'm male or white or anything else, right? It's a bunch of different things, and you have to think about that, don't you?
100%. And we're not only that, we're also looking for different age groups. So we're from birth to death, and everything in between. That's our audience. And if we can get an audience in at a young age for family entertainment, just like Don just said, then they have a connection to the theater for a lifetime, and then they'll keep coming back. It may be a few months before you find something on our schedule that you like, that fits your taste. But if you give it a little bit of while, something will revolve and you'll be back through our doors.
Well, I love the juxtaposition. You have currently a show, the Bee Gees, right? And then you have a show on Prince, right? Music both, but different types of audiences, right? When you think about your schedule, Kevin, and you're looking at your audience cohorts, right? And you define them different ways, right? That there's an age distribution, there's a gender distribution, there's an identity distribution, and so on. Jacksonville, I think, is something like, if memory serves, it's like 60% white, about 30% African American, and then you have a distribution of Asian, native groups, and so on and so forth. And then you have, of course, the different professions that are represented, and those can map to different interests. When you look at your schedule, how do you think about serving that audience? Are you looking at audience tastes, or are you looking just at what's available, or how is that working for you?
A lot of it is what is available, who is routing, and then I back into what will fit within our community. But I don't segment anything. I mean, I do go about it that I think everything fits within Jacksonville. So the process is to try to find a place for whatever art form I'm presented. So I'm trying to find a place for them to perform. Whether it is here in the theater in full capacity. We do sometimes do half capacity shows where I know I'm not going to sell the full capacity. So we'll do lower level only, pretend we're 1,000-seater, make it work. It can financially viable, services the community. And if it doesn't work there, then I'll try to find another home for it. Whether it's a 400-seater off site, so that we can still be part of the show. We can still try to build this artist, and still present this artist to our community. So I don't really start from the community. I obviously start from what product is out there, and then how will it fit within the puzzle.
So you're triangulating between the offerings and the audience, right?
Correct.
So Numa, Don, could you both jump in, because here we're talking, Kevin's talking about programming not only for the audience, but also programming for financial stability, right? Because you have to make sure that you're selling tickets. You have to make sure that the shows are not, that the expense is not so extravagant. Even if you sell out, you might take a loss. So could you each jump in about this whole idea of maintaining balance? And of course, Don, as the representative of the fiduciaries of this organization, the board, you're looking at the money, right? And Numa, you're reporting on how financially robust you are and your physical facility, meaning that it's depreciating all the time. It's absorbing cash as you maintain it.
Chair, who is here with us today, is an accountant, so we never lose sight of the money. So that's a really good question. 30 plus years ago, when I first became a presenter, there was a lot of money available from the government and from the corporate sector. You saw a wonderful dance company and you wanted to bring them to your community, and you went to the local diner because you could probably find the bank president having lunch there. Then you had a quick conversation, and it was a he then,
Right,
he said, "Send me a letter. We'll take care of it." That it's a very different situation now, and there's not nearly as much government money and not nearly as much corporate money as there used to be. So we watch our finances very closely. We have a handful of shows every year that we do because that's what we're supposed to do. We're a cultural organization. We make sure we try to have a modern dance company every year, but we go into that knowing we're going to lose about $25,000 that night. And we go into that knowing we got to find that money somewhere else. So we either need a sponsor or the accumulated profits from a bunch of other shows. And we budget that way too. So we know, we have very realistic expectations, and we know we can only afford to do that a few times a year.
I love that point. So when you're deciding to do that, right, Don, that's got to make you wince, right? To make a purposeful decision to lose money, right, which is essentially what Numa's talking about, but you're supporting some of that, right, Don?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, one of the first things I did when I came on the board is I sat down with Kevin, and we have a dashboard where I can see every show and all of the metrics that relate to that show. And it's interesting to see how many, there might be 50 to 100 on there. And you never know if one's going to be successful or not. I mean, if some of the shows that we've had recently, we've had 3 or 4 big hits in the last month. And we've got a lot of them coming up. I was going to tell you, I was looking at my shows that I bought tickets to. I just had Patti LaBelle, and then I've got Al Stewart. Remember Year of the Cat? He's playing here next week, and then I've got Yacht Rock Review, Frankie Valli, and the Guess Who. That's coming in the next 2 or 3 weeks. All kinds of different things, and a lot of those are very popular shows. Sometimes they aren't, but we also get shows where we might sell 600 tickets the first time, and the next year is 900, and then all of a sudden it's 15 to 1800. So I like to look at that. I sit down with Kevin before every board meeting. I go through that dashboard. I also ask what we have on the horizon. And it's very exciting, from an accounting perspective, to look at that and go, well, Kevin, how can we possibly make money on that? And then we do. And so I think that one of the biggest advantages we have is we have 2 people with the experience like Numa and Kevin, and they can find those diverse acts that are successful as a whole. We're not trying to be successful one night. We're trying to be successful for the entire year. And that's going to have a number of big winners and a number of small losers, which to us might be winners because we get a new audience in there.
That's really, really important, because at the end of the day, what you're doing is you're investing in the perception of the audience that they are part of the theater, right? So if you can invest in a way that might bring in a new audience because you're presenting a show that is not a standard show and doesn't have a standard audience, doesn't have a pre-baked audience, you're taking a bit of a risk, but you're doing it in a measured way, and you're doing it so that your return on investment might not be financial as much for that particular show, but it's adoption. Is that what I'm understanding you saying in terms of how you're thinking about this, Don?
If I may,
Absolutely.
Mark, you talked a minute ago about resiliency, and I think our resiliency is our diversity. There's someone who used to work at this theater who used to talk about our audience. Our audience won't like that show. And Kevin was the first to point out that maybe there's another audience. It's not your audience. There's many audiences. And you mentioned, in 1927, most of the audiences probably were white. And I can say we have documented the fact that 100% of the audiences were white, because in Jacksonville, the entire buildings were segregated. There were white theaters and there were black theaters, and neither audience was welcome in the other. And we keep that legacy in mind, that it's one of the reasons why we want to make sure that at least once a year, there's an opportunity for everybody to come here and see something they like. Hopefully more than one opportunity, but we want everybody, ages, races, where you live. We want everybody to come here and have a reason to come here. We're very lucky that we're a presenter, because that gives us an opportunity to have a variety of programs and diversify our calendar. And if something doesn't work, well, we've got some other things that do work.
And the young people are now identifying in different ways. My kids identify as European extraction, of Filipino extraction. In terms of race, it's all ambiguous in terms of sensibility and orientation and identity, and so it's all very ambiguous. They're not just satisfied with a particular category, which relegates them to having particular tastes, right? So, and that's where the audiences are going. The audiences are listening to Bollywood music, right? Coming in from all these different places, and you're hearing it in the popular culture. So, Kevin, as you're trying to program for the next generation and basically educating the next generation to love the theater, because that's what you're doing, right? You're trying to imprint the idea of loving the theater, loving this institution on people who will be your future audiences. How does that connect with Don's point about making an investment that might be a loss leader, but in order to cultivate that audience so that you retain that kind of attendance that you have today?
We start with the family entertainment shows, the television characters, the stuff that's going to bring them in at a 3, 4, 5-year-old. And get that instant connection. The lost leader stuff isn't necessarily to bring in a young audience. It's to service an art form more than just an age group, if you will.
Oh, that's interesting.
Right. There's an assumption that if like there's Patti LaBelle's audience, and then there's the audience for if Al Stewart, and then there's an audience for Frankie Valli, and then there's an audience for Yacht Rock Review, and Dawn slid between all 4 of those, but you wouldn't think that would be the case that there. But so if you have Patti LaBelle, it allows you to sell tickets to future shows that aren't necessarily in the R&B realm. So you have to look at it as a holistic approach.
How do you get the people between the time when they are raising families and they're older, and the and sort of the youth audience? Because in order to bring that new audience in and to acculturate them to the theater, you have to get them when there's a lot of resistance. They're going to bars, they're going to parties, they're going, right? That's where the energy is. They're not necessarily going to theaters, but you want to get them acculturated, you want to get them connected at that point. And it's kind of awkward because if you cater to those folks, you might lose your mainstay audiences. How do you deal with that to make sure, because arts organizations across museums, performing arts centers, theaters, symphonies, and so on, they're all after that audience and they're tough to grab. How do you all do that?
It's not an easy task to get that younger audience. Economics play a huge factor. We are a very expensive building, and so therefore the ticket prices have to be a certain amount. So it's not easy. They come out in two ways. One, their favorite artist plays the room. That's what brings them out. Trying to move out of the only music space and into stand-up comedy, podcasters, alternative programming, that brings them out.
Well, that's interesting. So going into comedy and going away from just a standard music fare.
Not going away from anything. It's just adding layers upon layers. We don't get away from everything. You know, we're open for business in every genre and every form of entertainment. But we layer it. We don't say we're only a rock and roll house or we're only a movie theater, or we do something for everybody, and it's different art forms every night of the week. And the advent of the podcast has been a nice little addition to bring a younger audience into the mix.
Numa, talk a little bit about that, about going into because now you're talking about different infrastructure, right? You have to invest in the infrastructure that is required for comedy versus music versus podcasts and so on. Talk a little bit about those investments.
It's super interesting that every so often, the cycle seems to be speeding up, but every so often something new will come along. And so let's take YouTube, for example. People start making shows on YouTube, and then someone gets the bright idea, hey, we should take that YouTube show and turn it into a stage show and tour it. And then podcasting happened and people began to realize, we could take our podcast on the road and do it live in front of an audience.
Or you could record something that ends up on YouTube, right, at your theater.
Yes, which has happened. So probably the hardest part of Kevin's job is to keep an eye on all of that and to try to have your finger on the pulse of how things are evolving. We had a former board member who remembered fondly a 1-year period in the late 2000s when 4 or 5 big name alternative rock bands played here back to back. Fleet Foxes, Avid Brothers, Daniel Tosh, the comedian, Death Cab for Cutie, and somebody else, like within a couple months. And forever thereafter, she would tell me, the Florida Theater used to be a cool place for young people, and you don't have any cool bands anymore. And Kevin's the one who pointed out to me, it's not that we don't have cool bands anymore. We just don't have the cool bands that she wants to see. The younger air quotes audience has evolved into something else.
Yeah.
And, what she thinks of as the young audience is not the young audience anymore. And the actual young audience wants something different that didn't exist just a couple of years ago.
And what that also does is it means that the way you manage, so for example, the competencies that you build into the organization is firm competencies that you will fund on a sustained basis versus partners. For example, if you need to do YouTube shoots or whatever, you probably don't have on camera. You don't have camera staff on a full-time basis. You probably hire that in periodically,
Correct.
Right? And then you have to think about your infrastructure, because if you're preparing for an online world, maybe you start to build in to the theater you talked about the sound booths during the film stage. So Don, when Numa comes into you and says, hey, this is where it's going. It's probably going to be sustained for the next 10 to 15 years. I can't see beyond the horizon there, but we need to have an infrastructure investment here because we're using it now and we're going to be using it for the next couple of years. How do you look at that as the fiduciary?
Well, the funny thing is we're in the middle of that project right now. We've done a number of the items already. I mean, we're probably going to sneak in 35, 40 million by the time we're done. And we're about halfway through that. And one of the first things we fixed was the sound and the lights, because there's a big difference to a customer of the theater who comes. And when you come to the theater, if you see a show, like I'm going to tell you, we're going to see the Guess Who in a couple of weeks. The Guess Who at the Florida Theater is going to be better than the Guess Who in an arena or some other places because of the acoustics, the lighting, and the ambiance within our theater. But now we've got some things we're going to do backstage. We did a lot of the things that are for the customers that are there. The next thing we'll be doing is fixing things for the artists that are there. And it's funny, even back to what Kevin has done. I was thinking we've sold out a thing called Cirque Musical during the holidays. We also sold out Kevin Hart. I think we had a show at 7:00. We sold it in 4 minutes, Kevin?
Yeah, it's pretty
We
cool.
added another show and almost sold it out too. And then you add all those together, and then so you're selling out different genres and completely different entertainment. And so
I love the point about serving the artist, because what's going on right now is that artists, for a while, they were able to make book on their recordings, which they were selling as records, as CDs, and so on. Even comedy folks were able to boost their income by that direct sales. Now, since there's so many intermediaries, and those intermediaries are controlling the platforms, and they're also controlling the terms under which artists function. Look at Spotify and so on. Artists are being bereft of the income that sustains them as artists, right? So they're beginning to tour again, right? They're going back to the old model and they need theaters. They need theaters, they need audiences, they need you, because if they don't, they cannot sustain themselves and they as artists. So in a sense, Numa, what you were talking about previously about investing in the art just because it is an art form that requires investment. You cited dance, for example, modern dance as an example. That's really important, because otherwise we're just not going to have creatives creating.
One of the things we bring to our community is a constant stream of creative minds from the outside. And, one of the things I always hope for is that, someone who walks in the door tonight, something happens on the stage and they have an aha moment that maybe, helps them at work or helps them in their personal life and, makes their life a little bit better. And then there's a spillover effect from that to all of their friends and family. And, that all comes from providing them with access to creative minds.
And that's important for the economy, right, Don? I mean, you cannot attract creatives if you don't have creatives that are in the theaters that are providing the artistic expression that really causes my neurons and causes other people's neurons to fire.
Oh, absolutely. I think that you need to be able to have that, and we have so many genres that we bring to the theater. We need all of them. And there's just something special about seeing a show in the theater. There's some shows that we get almost every year, and my wife and I go every year just because a night out at the theater is better than a night out at an arena or an outdoor concert. It just is. And we still do it, and we'll continue to do it.
So this is fabulous. I'm going to give Kevin the last word. And one of the things that I'd like you to talk about, Kevin, is this whole idea of bringing artists together in conversation with an audience, and also bringing audiences together in conversation with each other. We are so isolated right now behind our screens, behind our devices, and you're providing an in-person experience. It's the first thing I bet you say, or you have somebody say when they come in and everybody settles down, is please turn off your devices, right?
Yeah, Numa has that in his pre-curtain speech, for sure.
Well, there you go, Numa, right? You're saying,
Yeah.
let's talk to each other. Let's experience. We're here. Let's experience. So, Kevin, when
I'm
you
going to shock you a little bit, though. We do permit cell phone use, and I frankly don't understand it. But videotape, making a selfie of yourself against the stage, videotaping the show has become an integral part of the experience for a lot of people. And I don't understand why you'd pay $75 a ticket to look at your cell phone all night, but many people, that's the experience for them. And we don't want to, well, frankly, we can't. It's a losing battle to try to
right,
police the audience. But there are nights when the performers will ask us to say something and will ask us to police the audience. There you go. And on those nights, I will go out to make the curtain speech and thank our season sponsor, and I will tell the audience, listen, so and so has asked me personally to ask you, put your phones away for the night. Enjoy the experience, be present, enjoy the experience in person. You're about to see a great show. Don't spend it watching your little screen. And we will get 100% compliance. People will put their phones away and be present. And that's a great experience when it happens.
but I love that response. I love the pushback, right? Because you do have to align to the audience, but I still think that the idea of people interacting is so valuable nowadays, particularly nowadays after COVID and so on. Anybody else want to comment on that idea of the theater as a place, as really a social place, a social gathering place?
Yeah.
You want to
No question.
raise my voice?
Every time I come to a show, I'll take a picture or a small video of who's up there, and I'll put it on Facebook and Instagram, and all my friends look and go, "Oh wow, you're seeing Frankie Valli tonight." It kind of keeps you in touch with your friends, but it's also good advertisement for the theater because somebody will call me and go, "Why didn't you tell me Frankie Valli was playing tonight?" And so it helps. It makes the experience better, I think. Now, some people can get a little out of hand. They're moving their camera around here and there, but on the whole, it's such a good environment there. It's not bad with the intrusions you might get.
Well, this is fabulous. I want to thank you all for sharing the work of the Florida Theater. Numa Saisselin, President, Don Cameron, Chairperson, and Kevin Stone, Vice President of Programming. I want to also extend our thanks to all of the people who make this happen. Every ticket buying member, every contributor, every company who supports you, your entire staff. It's just so wonderful to benefit, even as a citizen who lives way far away, right? Just this conversation is so exciting to me, and thank you so much for participating in the show. And please also we'll send out the message. Please contribute. All the viewers should contribute to your local nonprofit, Florida Theater, if you'd like. It would just be great to help keep these organizations alive and vital and well, and serving the community as you've described. Thank you so much.